bunch of them on this bird. Several of them right here in the top of the head. There's another one just loose and just dropped. We may not see that one again. This is really quite unusual. Two of them just fell off here. They're all apparently completely engorged and ready to fall off.
Here's one. Here's one. Here. 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 So that's 81 larvae in one 30-meter drag.
We have this project where we're testing ticks from all over the country. These are ticks that are coming into contact with people.
Texas, New York, Virginia, Florida, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Oklahoma, Wyoming, California, Georgia, Ohio, Indiana, Nevada, Alabama, North Carolina.
Ticks are not just in the Northeast where we classically think they are. They're in the South, they're in the far West, and that means that these things are everywhere.
There is an epidemic disease spreading across the United States. It's called Lyme disease. It's serious and can be fatal.
As it digs in for a meal of blood, it can inject the germ it carries right into your bloodstream. Shaped like a corkscrew and called a spirochete, first cousin of the spirochete that causes syphilis, and equally elusive.
The disease causes symptoms that look like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS.
Meanwhile, debate is growing over the proper treatment for Lyme disease.
Most cases respond to treatment with antibiotics, but others do not. Whether they suffer from a chronic form of the disease is a hotly contested debate among doctors, patients, and insurance companies.
There is a public perception that Lyme disease can routinely present in a myriad of ways. That is incorrect.
Right now, my hands are burning, my feet are burning. Every joint in my body hurts all day. That's Lyme disease.
You brought a tick.
The Lyme disease, the ticks, they're everywhere.
Last year, there were cases reported in 24 states.
37 states. 43 states.
45 states.
And it may be as close as your backyard.
I get a really guilty feeling when I come down here. Because, you know, I guess it's about starting something that I was never able to finish. And it kind of just reminds me of when life used to be normal. It's really hard to make people understand what's at stake. It's so much more than just suffering and disease. It's like an atomic bomb drops down on your life and just turns everything upside down. Tons of medications. These are pill organizers, oxygen, empty meds. Those are all full. This is what life became. I would let it all burn just to see Julia walk.
Let's see you go, dude. Let's see you go.
As a kid, I was very eager. I was very active. I loved to dance. And I used to love to ride my bike.
Really good?
But those things about me started to change. Even though I knew something was wrong, I never imagined it would be this. Like a week before I started to get seriously ill, well, I started to notice it was hard to get out of bed in the morning. And you know, everybody has those days where they can't imagine waking up. But it was every day, and it took me like an hour to get out of bed. The second week that I was sick, I was just sitting in class, and my legs went numb.
The school called me and they said something is seriously wrong with Julia. You need to get here right away. When I got there, I found Julia in the nurse's office, and she was just lifeless across 2 chairs. And I went to go nudge Julia, and I'm, Julia, what's the matter? What happened? She's like, Dad, I can't see. She said, I can't feel my arms and I can't feel my legs. So I took her straight to the hospital. Julia was tested for everything several times, not just once, and everything comes back negative. It was a very confusing time. I felt like Julia was dying. So I spent a lot of time researching all her symptoms. Julia's doctor would come to me and say, did you find anything else that we could test for? So I would give her a list, and she would run tests for everything I gave her. Again, I put in the search with Julia's symptoms, and Lyme disease comes up. And I said, I have to read this. And then I started researching the area that we vacationed in, the area around our house. There's Lyme disease in these areas. The story is told very clearly just looking at her medical records. You know, Julia got bit by a tick when she was 9 years old. She went undiagnosed for the next 2 years. I felt like somebody threw a bucket of ice water over my head. I called Josephine, I called the kids, I tell them I know what she's got Lyme. And when the doctor came in, it was like night and day. She went from being this wonderful supporting doctor, willing to try anything, to adamant, no, impossible, this is not it. I mean, it was almost like as if we were using profanity, like Lyme disease was a bad word. They saw nothing wrong in the laboratory test, and they figured she must be faking it.
I remember just hearing that, and like, I couldn't believe it. Like, I'm having real symptoms. I was comatose, I was losing my hair.
Fever, flaccid paralysis. How could she be faking fever? The color blue. She was blue in color. The doctor insisted that this had to be convergent syndrome. I felt like we were being attacked, and I felt like I had to start recording what was going on.
I know what I feel. I looked at definitions myself of conversion disorder, and I have a question. Do you think I have it?
I think that nothing fits 100% for anything, not even conversion disorder. I think we have tested at least 100 things, and I think of the 100 things, that's what I think is the most likely.
We all have different opinions, and if you guys think that, that's okay. But I still want to figure out what I have, and I want to walk again. So if you guys think that, that's okay. I just want to go home. I want to go back to my normal life. I want to figure this out.
She was only 11 years old, you know, and she had to put up an argument like that. The first thing I think of is how many people go through this and then just go home and suffer in silence.
I came to the Lyme disease controversy as an outsider, as an investigative reporter who wanted to find out what was going on. I went into it intending to look at the trend in Lyme disease cases. Was government doing enough to control ticks? I also wanted to know why I could get a vaccine for my dog, but there was none for my children and grandchildren. The main question is whether Lyme disease is chronic. Does it respond to the short courses of antibiotics that are recommended? By and large, a small group of researchers and government officials basically say short courses of antibiotics cure. There was another side, though. I found patients who had been to 10, 15, 20 doctors, and they still had lingering, serious symptoms and were tired of being ignored. What I found after 2 or 3 stories was that I had waded into one of the most controversial, divisive, and vicious medical debates in medicine today.
There is a medical detection story in the making. It deals with arthritis and the possibility that a type of arthritis may have been uncovered which is caused by an insect bite.
The outbreak of arthritis is centered in Lyme, Connecticut, a small town located on the Connecticut River. In the past 3 years, there have been 51 reported cases of the mysterious arthritis. Several adults have been treated, but most of the victims are children.
So in the early 1970s, Alan Steer is a newly minted rheumatologist who has also studied epidemiology, namely, how do we define and count diseases? He's the guy from Yale who answers the call of a young mother who reports that 2 of her children have been diagnosed with juvenile arthritis, as have a number of others.
Let me ask you, Dr. Steer, how did you get on the trail of this particular form of arthritis?
Frank, a number of parents in this community were concerned that so many children seem to have arthritis. This is where the medical detective story comes in. Actually, like a detective, you try to determine where the people were when they got their illness, when it occurred, where they were in relation to one another.
In 1977, he publishes a paper on an epidemic of arthritis. Dr. Steer found that 25% of that original Lyme disease group had something of a rash, a bullseye rash. And he also links this illness to the bite of a tick. But as time went on, his focus changed, and Dr. Steer was recognized in the Lyme community as someone who was not their ally.
Lyme is chronic! Lyme is chronic! All we want is long-term treatment.
If a patient thinks that they have Lyme disease, are being treated with antibiotic therapy, and are not responding, the most common reason is that they actually have another illness.
As Lyme disease evolved, doctors needed guidance. So a group got together called the Infectious Diseases Society of America and wrote the first guidelines to treat Lyme disease, where they staked their claim that this disease was not chronic.
This is a fairly benign disease if treated early.
It has on occasion been life disruptive, but I don't want to overemphasize that fact.
As hard as the IDSA tried to solidify treatment of Lyme disease in one way only, there were cracks that emerged over time. And these cracks, if you will, were, a doctor here, a doctor there, who discovered following the guidelines didn't always work.
I decided to return to Westchester County around 1985. Unbeknownst to me, Westchester at that time was beginning to be a burgeoning epidemic. I knew virtually nothing about Lyme disease when I went into practice. I knew the name, that's about it. What I was observing was incredible. People would get sick, you treat them, they get better, and then the same symptoms would start creeping back. How can an organism survive these antibiotics?
These were really in the early days when we were all looking for answers. I was having a lot of patients coming into my office with bullseye rashes, and about 80% would get better with standard antibiotics, but 20% would not. So I would look at the guidelines, but unfortunately those guidelines were not specific enough to deal with the complexity of what I was seeing.
So when I first was learning about Lyme disease, I was really interested in an article that came out in 1989, written by a neurologist, Andrew Packner. His article was called Lyme Disease, the New Great Imitator. And in that article, he presented 6 cases that were fascinating. There was one case of an individual who had aggression outbursts, a young child, and when he was treated, the OCD went away. Here we have an infectious illness that's causing psychiatric problems. So why was Lyme disease called the new great imitator? Because the first great imitator was syphilis. Syphilis was caused by a spiral-shaped organism called a treponeme, and Lyme disease is caused by a spiral-shaped organism. Syphilis caused a huge variety of manifestations, so it mimicked other diseases.
Lyme disease may be the great masquerader of the 1980s and 90s in that it can do almost anything.
The Lyme disease spirochete is shaped like a corkscrew, so it drills through your joint cartilage. It quickly leaves the bloodstream. It goes to organs, it goes to the heart and the brain.
The Lyme disease bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi, is definitely one of the smartest bacteria on the planet. This organism knows how to change forms. It knows how to hide, and the way it evades the immune system, Lyme is more difficult to find on the blood tests.
And many of us clinicians were observing that. Patients that we strongly believed had Lyme disease, their standard tests for Lyme disease were negative. And as a result, it is easy for people to honestly, confuse Lyme for other conditions.
The most common misdiagnoses that I see in my practice are people who've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis is a big one, patients who have dementia, Alzheimer's. Lyme can imitate all of these different diseases, so it's a very, very complex organism, and you really have to understand the biology to understand how to treat these patients effectively.
We're now up to almost 500,000 cases of Lyme disease in America every year. There are more cases of Lyme disease than HIV and breast cancer combined. Of those 500,000, about 10 to 20% will stay sick for some period of time. We now believe that something on the order of 2 million people suffer the after effects of Lyme disease in the United States. So, 50 years later, here we are, and we still haven't answered many of the most urgent and basic questions. Chronic Lyme disease is a rejected term in American medicine. The question is, why?
Home sweet home away from home. And it is time to do the ritual ironing. feel guilty staying in this place. Usually like an embassy suites person. I literally just came from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is like an incredibly endemic area. And just to hear the stories there with whole towns and neighborhoods being infected, the mere fact that I validate their disease, you know, and recognize it's not all in their head, that they're not just fabricating everything. I think that's so important for people to have. Maybe somebody like me who's in the medical profession saying, I hear you, you know, I get it.
It is my honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Dr. Neil Spector. Dr. Spector is one of the top breast cancer scientists in the country. The Lyme community is so incredibly fortunate to have one of the smartest minds in research who is working towards better treatment and a cure for tick-borne illnesses.
Okay, Lyme disease. It's everywhere, right? This isn't just a problem in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. It's all over the place, and it's only getting worse. We've got people at the prime of their lives who are taken out of society, and yet we have no clue what's going on with them. I'm coming up on 10 years of a heart transplant recipient. That was an evening that I'll never forget, Friday evening. Surgeon walked into my room, and he said to me, you'll be dead by Monday without a heart transplant. You could do all the right things in the world and get bit by a tick, and it'll change your world forever. I just moved here to North Carolina. It was 1998. Just started a new job. Our daughter was a few weeks old. I had always been unbelievably healthy. I mean, I ran marathons. I used to run 10 miles a day, 6 days a week. So it was a very foreign experience for me to go from taking care of cancer patients to barely being able to walk 10 yards without having to stop. We went through autoimmune diseases, lupus, all the tests were negative. I completely fell through the cracks of the medical system. And it wasn't until 4 years into my illness that I developed arthritis. And so started piecing it together and said, you know, I'm convinced I have Lyme disease. I got a call in my office, and the cardiologist said to me, is there a chair nearby? You know, you've got a severely damaged heart. You need to be evaluated for a heart transplant. I'm not sure how I drove home, just completely in tears, thinking, this is it. I cannot live beyond a certain age. Never gonna see my daughter grow older. I'm not gonna see any of the milestones. And then I just realized, you know, I'm not gonna just roll over and let that be the answer. I'm gonna do whatever it takes. A few minutes after telephone call, that your new heart has been found. Yep, given the old V sign.
Moment of victory. But then you sit with all those other feelings of the person who lost their life. That's a whole other side of things too, that sitting with what is their family going through. Those were hard emotions to sort out.
They were, yeah. They're still difficult.
They are still difficult.
I think about that a lot. You know, why me? Sometimes you feel the pressure of having to live your life in an extraordinary way for those people who unfortunately didn't have the opportunity. You know, with all these unknowns, there is one known, and that's that people are falling through the cracks of the medical system. The burden should not be on people who are sick to prove that they're sick. It should be on us as medical professionals to better understand what's going on and to help them.
It was a very hard time for all of us. We felt we were losing Julia. I had nobody to take care of Julia. So me and my wife had to make a decision. One of us had to stay home.
My dad deciding that he wasn't going to go back to work. And I remember breaking my heart because I was ruining everybody's life. And I couldn't control it, couldn't do anything about it.
We were struggling. I was without salary. It felt like an unwinnable battle. And then something really extraordinary happened.
This is the plane that is bringing Pope Francis here to New York City for the very first time. Tremendous sense of excitement. And here he is.
He steps out of the plane, and it's almost like he makes like a beeline straight to me.
And Julia, how come you're in the wheelchair? I understand you're fighting a tough fight, right?
Well, I've been undiagnosed for 4 months, and I have a clinical diagnosis of Lyme disease.
And why did you come here today?
I came here because I wanted to meet the Pope because I believe in a miracle.
You believe in a miracle?
She just garnered a lot of media attention. We started getting phone calls from every network.
This was the strangest story. A vibrant, healthy, 12-year-old girl.
You know, suddenly in like a second, my life just changed.
The mothers at Julia's school, they started this GoFundMe page that was very successful.
We started getting bombarded with letters from all different people who had Lyme disease around the world.
We went from being alone to being like exposed. And, you know, we didn't realize it then, but we were in the middle of a tremendous controversy.
Convinced that Julia had chronic Lyme, her father decided to fight back, only to find himself right in the middle of a mind-boggling medical war.
There's a lot of misinformation out there about Lyme disease.
Wormser was a lead author of Lyme treatment guidelines, followed by the CDC. Recently, he equated some of the chronic Lyme conversation to fake news. He never treated Julia, but he influenced many who did.
I'll never forget the day we got the phone call. I went outside to have a cigarette, and my phone rang. And I pick up the phone, and it's somebody from the CDC.
Hello?
Hi, may I speak with Mr. Patesi, please?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Dr. calling from CDC. I'm calling because I really am sorry about what's going on with your family. But I will say that there's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet that's very misleading, and we base the treatment guidelines on the scientific facts.
So listen, I appreciate your phone call. Julia's been sick for the past 7 months, ignored by our medical society because of outdated guidelines that the CDC sets as requirements.
Patients who have been truly infected for 7 months would have a robust immune response and easily.
You're following guidelines that date back to the 80s.
No,
your guidelines had not moved with the medical state.
I didn't call for you to yell at me. I'm sorry for what you guys are going through, and I really want you to be cautious. We have heard from lots of patients.
Okay.
Number one, the long-term treatment
All right.
is not instructed.
I appreciate your phone call, okay, but I do not accept your advice because your advice is as outdated as your
Good
guidelines.
luck to you guys, and really be cautious. These
Goodbye. Take care. Thank you very much.
Not too long after that, Julia was interviewed by Fox 5, and I excitedly shared this information with a list of my contacts. Somehow my email was sent to Dr. Philip Baker. Here's another man who has never met us. He has never had the opportunity to look at Julia's medical records. And he writes, since the results of laboratory tests for the diagnosis of Lyme disease were negative, were other possibilities considered to explain such symptoms? If not, wasn't this child denied the opportunity to get the medical treatment she deserved by obsessively focusing on Lyme disease? Perhaps this is the most tragic outcome of this sad story. Julia has been tested for everything under the sun several times. I guess they have their own motives for being interested in Julia's story, but I can't imagine any medical professional who holds a high position in the CDC calling a patient to deter them from treatment of any disease. How does that make sense?
Investigate the CDC! Investigate Lyme disease! Investigate the CDC! Investigate Lyme disease!
Doctors need to realize it's everywhere. I mean, birds fly, animals roam, people travel and pack their bags with clothing that they've been out in the woods with.
Every doctor I've been to is saying, like, we don't treat Lyme, or it's all in your head, or they'll see the strands, or it's not the CDC positive.
See, that's
so you're fine.
We understand that patients who don't feel well are desperate and seeking answers, but we're concerned that some of them fall into a trap of being treated for things that ultimately are not helping them.
There are very powerful forces standing in the way of progressive attitudes towards Lyme. Most notably, Centers for Disease Control. Because they are the leader, not just for this country, but for all other countries in the world. And their intransigence has created just a world of problems. In the early 90s, I was actually invited out to CDC Fort Collins. You know, I gave a talk there, and afterwards we all went out to ski. I've had very good relations with many of the folks at CDC over many years. It's not the people, it's the policies. And the question is, who sets CDC policies and why?
One of my major stories for the Poughkeepsie Journal was when I obtained a sheaf of emails, 2,500 pages actually. These emails were between the major players in Lyme disease, as well as officials in the CDC and NIH. The emails belied a sort of us against them mentality. In one email, this researcher from Yale by the name of Derland Fish was commenting how Lyme disease groups were organizing. They were holding protests. What he said was, this battle cannot be won on a scientific front. We need to mount a socio-political offensive, but we are outnumbered and outgunned. We need reinforcements from outside our field. There was another very telling email. In 2007, Phil Baker was leaving the National Institutes of Health. He was the person who decided on grants for Lyme disease research. And what he said was, I'll certainly miss all of you people, the scientists, but not the Lyme loonies. When I asked him for a comment, he said that might be too kind a description. In one more from an official at the National Institutes of Health, what we have here is a war, an insurgency against evidence-based medicine. It's time to start shooting back.
It's such a bad article, the computer doesn't even want to open it up. That happens sometimes. Anti-science. Huh. Who like publishes this stuff? So one of the problems with these anti-science articles, they sort of make these broad claims. And then they make it like people like me who would question the testing, the treatment, and try to lump me into people who believe, that the moon doesn't exist and the world is flat. And they're deflecting the real issues. What kind of a disease is it that you're ostracized by the very community that should be helping you? I don't think you have to have an MD to think there's something wrong here. What is it that these people have in common? Now, you could either say they all have in common that they're crazy, or you could say there's like something out there that's causing this. This may be some of the first Lyme science being done on this campus. And in fact, some of these projects are really the first to be done in this country. These are ideas that I've been working on and my colleagues have been working on in the cancer field for 20 plus years. And now we're finally going to be applying this to Lyme disease. What if I told you that we could image Lyme disease in your body? Can you imagine going to a doctor and say, wow, you've got pain in your left knee? That's kind of interesting because this scan is lighting up for Borrelia in your left knee. So we could actually show on a non-invasive scan that you've got the bugs in your body and you've got them where your symptoms are. We don't have anything like this. It's all guesswork. I mean, just like it is for cancer, this would be revolutionary in the way we diagnose and then the way we treat. Since my transplant, I realized that this field is sorely lacking. Bad diagnostics. We need better therapies. All of you know that. What I'm saying is that we can and we will do better. I'm going to make you that promise right here. The timeline that I promised to deliver is 3 years. I mean, that's like unheard of, but that's the pressure I'm putting on myself and everyone else. That's like a heavy burden when I know like what the desperation is and people are like, well, Neil, you're it. You got to deliver for us. So I'm going to deliver for people.
After the Pope, Julia was taking a turn for the worse. I knew that I had to find somebody that was willing to treat Julia for Lyme disease. And I started to realize that there's such a thing called Lyme literate doctors. Everyone I would call would have a waiting list of 6 to 8 months. You know, all these doctors are not covered by insurance companies. It all seemed a little sketchy.
Over here. Take a nice deep breath. Good. Let me see with your reflexes. Yeah, they're cold. Now, if you start to feel really, really dizzy with this, I will sit you down. I just want to see how fast your heart rate starts to go up.
Okay, good.
All right. Okay. I'll try and do this for at least, if you can, just for 1 minute, so I can get a sense of what the pulse rate's running. Is it really difficult?
Yeah,
If you have to sit down, it's okay.
Just down.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Go down. Let me just check the pulse now.
Okay.
I've never seen anyone have a heart rate of 250. That's off the wall. When I was looking for answers for Lyme patients, I discovered that there were multiple reasons why people stayed ill. It was like going to a doctor's office with 16 nails in your foot saying you have foot pain. And the doctor pulls out one nail and says, come back in a month. You still have 15 nails in your foot, you're gonna have pain. Some of it is that the Lyme organism is persisting, but part of it is also other infections. Right now, there are at least 18 different tick-borne diseases that can be transmitted by the bite of a tick. You know, the most common co-infections that we see that make people ill is Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella, right? And when you put them all together, the people get much, much sicker.
The first appointment with Dr. Horowitz, when I realized that they didn't accept insurance, you know, that was a red flag. I realize now that it's not a red flag. The first visit, I think it was anywhere between 3 and 4 hours. And so much was revealed to me about Julia's situation.
I was in insurance companies. I've accepted Medicare for at least 25 years. There just got to be a point when the insurance companies dropped me. There was just no way to continue in that way, and I had to go outside the system. I lost about 2,000 patients within a period of 6 months because I was spending too much of the insurance company's money for a disease that didn't exist. It was like, hear no evil, see no evil. They just didn't want to know about it.
Lyme disease is the first disease of epidemic proportion that came to light hand in hand with the development of managed care.
When HMO medicine started taking effect in the 1980s and 90s, it was easy to practice medicine for people that had straight diseases like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. I could get them in and out in 10 to 15 minutes. That was simple. The problem with Lyme disease is they have up to 38 different symptoms. You can't get that done in 12 to 15 minutes.
So here's a disease that's affecting a lot of people, can be costly, and there's been a very active role of the insurers, their agents, to define not Lyme disease away, but chronic Lyme disease away. I want to introduce everybody. This is Vicki Logan, and it is June 22nd, 2001. You are a former pediatric ICU nurse, correct? So you were a highly skilled professional and highly educated. Vicki Logan was a fairly early patient that I saw around 88 or 89. She presented a mystery that hadn't been solved. When she came to me, I studied her very carefully for a year, did all kinds of testing, everything that I knew how to do, not just for Lyme disease, but for other, conditions. I knew that she had grown up in Westchester County, and I knew that it was a very tick-infested area. Realizing that she was sick and getting worse, I felt that it was appropriate to treat her for the possibility that she might have Lyme. About a year later, she begged me for a spinal tap. Put a couple of cc's of spinal fluid in a special culture and shipped it off to the CDC. Several weeks later, I got an excited telephone call from David Dennis from CDC Fort Collins to let me know that spirochetes were growing out of her spinal fluid. He was quite excited about it and actually rather incredulous because he knew that she had already been treated with a regimen that was supposed to eradicate Lyme disease. And at that point, then I really knew what she had. And I treated you for 109 continuous days, and you progressively improved. But at a certain point, policies changed at Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield that made it almost impossible for people like Vicki to receive the treatment that she needed. There would be no reimbursement for that kind of care. In the late 1990s, Vicki and about a dozen other patients filed a lawsuit against Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield. The litigating attorney was a gentleman named Ira Moore, and he brought suit against Empire on behalf of these patients.
When you've got lots of disagreement as to what is appropriate diagnosis and treatment of Lyme disease, it makes it very hard for a Lyme disease patient and a lawyer like myself to go in there and challenge when an insurance company refuses to pay for very expensive intravenous antibiotic treatment.
One of the most revealing documents in the Lyme annals emerged from the case of Vicki Logan. One of the witnesses that came on to give testimony was Richard Sanchez, who worked for the insurance company. He really detailed, in a disturbing way, the way in which insurance companies red flagged Lyme disease and put up roadblocks.
They raised the bar, made it harder for people to qualify for the expensive IV treatment, knowing that there were some people who still would benefit from it and wouldn't qualify. And he considered those people to be the low-hanging fruit, the easy money to make for the insurance company.
In the meantime, some of the same people who created the Infectious Disease Society of America guidelines were consulting with the insurers on their internal Lyme disease guidelines policy.
So they created the guidelines on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they're getting, you know, $600 an hour in the 1990s to deny these cases. Leonard Siegel said his fee in 1996 was $560 an hour, and he even quipped that it was quite helpful in meeting college tuition for his kids.
There's good proof that one can do significant damage to patients by putting them on long-term intravenous antibiotics.
If one side in this controversy writes the protocol and says no one may be treated beyond 28 days with intravenous antibiotics, that's going to be disastrous for patients with Lyme disease.
There was a move by some of the insiders of the Infectious Disease Society to issue guidelines. I was part of the original guidelines. I tried to advise that we weren't ready to issue guidelines about long-term disease. We didn't have the information. You have to be really careful about issuing guidelines because they get abused. The overseers said we need to put out these Lyme disease guidelines. And there was some urgency to do something. I mean, there's Lyme disease out there. I said, well, we're not ready, but I could provide the language. There are patients who have ongoing symptoms for which the causation is unknown. And it's to be left to the judgment of the physician as to how to manage this. But that went too far for them. And they removed my draft and put in their own draft. It's like chronic Lyme disease doesn't exist. That was Dr. Wormser. He issued a final declaration as far as you can sign it, but we're not going to have a minority report, if you will. And so you're stuck. How are you going to undo something? Who's going to back off?
Unfortunately, I've seen people whose lives were destroyed because they went years and years and years with no treatment or inadequate treatment. And it ate away at their bodies and their brains, at their organs, until they succumbed. So it's a very complex situation, and the insurance companies have made use of that complexity to their economic advantage.
In my opinion, no way was her care experimental. Her care was absolutely medically necessary, and the necessity of it was demonstrated. Whenever she stopped being treated, she would deteriorate in objectively measurable ways, and when she got treated, she would improve in objectively measurable ways. Vicki went for a number of years without the treatment that she needed, and during that time, her condition deteriorated. One of her last stays at Northern Westchester, I undertook a long interview with her. Vicki, you want to take a couple of minutes to say anything from your own heart? She experienced a series of grand mal seizures. Her friend Rosalind said that Vicki, mouthed to her, "I love you," and within a few days, she was dead. Vicki's case was reported in the New York Times Science Times, I think in August of 1993. I fully expected that, that would be a turning point, and it's just incredible to me that here we are, pushing 30 years later, and there's still so much controversy and so much difficulty for the patients. Let me tell you that the deck was stacked against, Vicki and patients like her.
I need you to say when I stand up, although maybe I'm weak and I can't walk, but I'm not going to pass out.
Right.
And that's when I'm going to know, and that's the thing you have to understand is, until the blood pressure is controlled, I can't do the physical therapy for the legs. Right. And that's going to be essential to getting this whole thing done.
Absolutely.
So that's why I'm trying to go as fast as I can, but in a safe manner.
Right.
Julia, if you could put your arm out a little bit for me.
Okay. Dad, I don't want.
Let him get a blood pressure.
Okay, you can put it back in.
Right, stay here.
I'm staying.
Let me just check the pulse.
We are beating really fast.
She's at 140 beats per minute.
When you feel like you're dying and there's nothing else to try, you reach for anything you can. You have to take that risk.
Even if God came down and told me you're doing the right thing, I'd be scared. I'm scared till this day, giving her any medication. The hospitals wanted us to go into an inpatient rehabilitation center to get physical therapy and psychiatry. This is the only option the hospitals gave me. They gave me nothing else.
You just say when, Julie.
Started at 4.
Right.
9 seconds, 10 seconds.
Down.
Down.
Down, please go down. Go down, James. James, go down now, please, James.
I know that Julie's had plenty of breaks off of antibiotics for several months at a time, and she's gotten sicker off of medication. So what do? I can't just let her get worse. No, we have to try to fight until we feel like we've exhausted everything.
Night sweats, hot and cold, severe fatigue, shortness of breath, sore throats and swollen glands, joint pain in the knuckles, shoulders, severe headaches, burning, tingling, and buzzing sensations of the lower extremities with loss of sensation, blurry vision, severe cognitive problems. This is 5 months into this treatment.
Absolutely.
The majority of all these symptoms are better.
Open your eyes, Steven. It's so tight. Don't touch your eye. Don't.
I was forced to write this appeal because our insurance company was calling Julia's condition not medically necessary. I've paid high premiums to my insurance company for years. The fact that we were abandoned by the insurance company is unacceptable. We still have people showing us love and showing us support. Unfortunately, though, the funds aren't there anymore. Nobody really understands when you're dealing with a chronic disease, you know, treatment could go on for a very long time.
Hey, Cyclones fans, direct your attention to the field. It is time for our charity partner of the night. Julia has a long way to go on her path to wellness, and we need your help. Please Google Julia Brzezzi on GoFundMe and be as generous as you can.
Support Julia Brzezzi in a fight with Lyme disease. Spin the wheel for $10 and win a prize.
When I'm with my friends, even though I love my friends, it's amazing to see what their priorities are and what mine are. And what they think about when they're alone in their bed at night, and what I think about. Looking at a girl or boy my age, they kind of know what their future's like. Are they gonna go to college, get a job? But when I think about mine, I know what I want to do and I know what my goals are, and I just don't know what I'm gonna be capable of, and I think that's the scary part of this disease, is you don't know what the next day is gonna be like.
During the 1990s, there was all this fighting going on, and I often wondered what is going to change people's minds. They didn't believe that persistent infection after antibiotic treatment was possible. Unless you can prove the spirochete persists, repeated antibiotic therapy makes absolutely no sense. And I agree with them that that is a fundamental thing that you want to be able to show. What totally changed the world of Lyme disease research was in 2008, when one of the world's best researchers on Lyme disease published a paper showing that despite antibiotic treatment, the spirochete can persist. And then Monica Embers at Tulane published her paper showing persistent infection in the monkey model. So if that happens in the mouse model and the monkey model, why wouldn't it happen in the human?
I lead the vector-borne diseases core here at the Tulane Primate Center. I can infect 10 different monkeys with the same strain of Borrelia burgdorferi and see very different outcomes after antibiotic treatment. What we found, some were infected in the heart, some were infected in the joints, and probably the most surprising aspect of it was that we found multiple spirochetes in the brains of 2 of our doxycycline-treated monkeys. We know that they persisted.
We're dealing with a very unique situation here. The current Lyme antibiotic does not completely eradicate Borrelia bacteria. We found this dandelion phenomenon. The molar is equivalent to the antibiotics, the chopped off the top part. But because the root, the persistor is still there, they can grow back. You need drugs targeting both parts in order to more effectively cure this persistent form of the disease.
I think the future is good science, engaging top-notch researchers and getting them excited about the opportunities in this field. I've always stressed that I think this field could use people from the outside taking a fresh look. Just to be sitting in one place together talking about the issues, I've got very high hopes, as do I think everyone on the team, that we're heading in a very good direction.
When I was at Tulane, sitting in a room with like 15 people from all these major universities, all top researchers in their field, and for the first time ever, they were all in there in the same room saying, okay, chronic Lyme, we may not have a cure. Chronic Bartonella, we may not have a cure. Let's work on this problem. It's super hopeful. But you still have these doctors who are digging their heels in the sand. They're recognizing that there's a tide is turning, and they're becoming more vocal. If you have 3 major universities that come out, Johns Hopkins, Tulane, Northeastern, saying we can't kill Lyme effectively in the test tube, then you have a major problem. You have a major problem because their position becomes increasingly untenable. We have all this animal data showing that we're not curing the monkeys, we're not curing the dogs, we're not curing the mice, and we're not curing the horses with the same antibiotic regimens you're supposed to, cure people. Of course it's going to change. Look, the truth is the truth, and eventually it comes to the surface. But it's bubbling up very slowly, like glacially slowly. Too slow for people who are desperately ill.
For years, the federal government has spent very little to look into the problems of Lyme disease. Compare that to private foundations, which have spent something on the order of $100 million in recent years on research that today is answering some of the key questions that weren't even being asked by the federal government, by the traditional mainstream researchers. They have written over and over that Lyme disease is not chronic. They have published in major American journals, and the journals are as invested in that view as are these researchers, as is the CDC and the NIH. So to walk away from that now would be very difficult for them to do.
We've come a long way from when this seemed like a pipe dream, like, yeah, wow, wouldn't this be great if we could actually image Borrelia? And here we are, 2 years later, waiting to see this all-important experiment. A year from now, we'll be looking at a scan of the first patient getting this, hopefully. The current tests, only continue to fuel the debate of whether chronic symptoms are related to the persistence of living bacteria or whether they're related to, some other cause. If you could image this in the body, I think that removes all doubt. I'm not sure there's a controversy anymore. That to me is pretty definitive evidence that you've got the bacteria and you need to be treated for an active infection. I should have told these bacteria, don't piss me off. Oh,
whoa.
Wow.
Whoa.
Whoa. Look at
Okay.
that. Starry sky. Look at that.
Oh my gosh.
That is like Spiraking City.
You can see
Oh my
aggregates, you can see a little bit of smearing, and then a bunch of what looks to be individual.
It's like unbelievable. Look at that. This is in the heart.
Yep.
What if you could attach a toxin and just wipes those cells out? I mean, that's the magic bullet,
Yeah.
right? Kill the target, avoid the normal tissue. This is it. This is like proof of concept. We can actually do this. Appropriate diagnosis and treatment, it's going to save lives. And you know what? And vindication for everyone who has been denied care and told that they're crazy. This is like for you. Told it's all in your head. But you know what? It is all in your head. It's right there. It's in your head, it's in your heart, it's in your ear, it's in your joints. Good science will trump bad behavior. And when that change happens, hopefully, it won't just be at the level of clinical practice, but it'll be public policy, it'll be insurance coverage, and all the other injustices that have really been perpetuated will sort of fall by the wayside. I'm very hopeful of the work that we're doing. Every day that I come in, I push our team, I implore them, they all know your stories.
Please join me in welcoming Neil Spector. Neil?
I want to tell you, I think, a hopeful story. We want to develop a theranostic, a therapeutic diagnostic in one molecule.
Here you are, you're a physician, you're connected.
We need more research in this area. That's one of my missions, is to raise awareness that this is not a disease that's easily diagnosed and easily cured, as many believe.
Here is Dr. Neil Spector.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is my 10-year anniversary of my transplant from a misdiagnosis of Lyme disease. I know what it's like in a very tangible, real way to face your mortality. So, I'm not somebody who doesn't speak the language of those suffering. It's hard, though. It's hard. I mean, I get fatigued, I get tired. I need, frankly, to figure out a better balance in my life because there are times when I feel like I'm heading in a very bad direction and losing sort of perspective on my own life. I may actually go home and kind of relax for a little while before the next trip. Hang out with my dog and my family. That'll be good.
It's been very complicated. As far as treatment goes, there's just not enough here for Julia. Even though we've seen tremendous improvements with Dr. Horowitz, it's been like almost impossible to try to overcome certain things that I feel are really serious in Julia's health. So I've been doing a lot of research and looking at a lot of different treatment options in other countries. The most promising thing I found was embryonic stem cells in India. And Julia's been sick for 3 years. I think we've tried everything. There's one or two things we haven't tried, and this is one of them. Her diagnosis for Lyme was missed. You know, doesn't seem like it's gonna be an easy thing to fix.
May I start? Julia is a known case of Lyme disease, is that correct?
That's correct.
Julia, how old are you?
15.
Are you aware that this premorlar stem cell treatment is an experimental treatment and there are no guarantees of any medical benefits it will give?
Yes.
And are you willing to undergo it?
Yes.
Thank you.
You know, reading the consent, I almost feel guilty. You know, you always feel like you're making the wrong decisions. You don't know. You know, as sufferers, we're vulnerable. So we, you know, are easy to buy into anything, you know.
Okay, just hold this position. Can you just hold it there, yeah? Don't let it fall. Bring it out. Hold it. Hold the position. Try and hold it.
There's no sensing. Can't sense.
Try and hold it. Try and bring it out towards me. Bring it out. Try and bring it out. Out. Try and dig it in. In. No? Right.
One form of arthritis may be caused by a germ or virus that's being transmitted by ticks, the insects that thrive in wooded areas. The research could, at the same time, in the distant future, lead to the development of a vaccine against this one form of arthritis, which is being called Lyme arthritis.
Around 1980, a law called Bayh-Dole was passed. Bayh-Dole changed the patent law to make it permissible for grantees of federal funds and also some of the federal agencies themselves to benefit from patents that were acquired.
This set the stage for people who had at one time been just pure scientists to actually make money from their research. And it set the stage for some pretty concerning conflicts of interest.
So, okay, this is 1980. So guess what? 1982, that's when the Borrelia organism was discovered. A, the Lyme organism is arguably one of the most complex bacteria known to man. And B, arguably or maybe inarguably, it is the most heavily patented bacteria known to man. So everybody has a piece of this bacteria.
A study out tonight concludes lab tests for Lyme disease are strikingly inaccurate. Experts say tests made by more than 30 companies who jumped into the business are just not very good. The government is now pumping money into developing a better blood test. A little late, experts say, but a recognition that what was once a regional problem is now a national one.
So, in 1994, the major players in the NIH, in the CDC, and the IDSA came together for a conference in Dearborn, Michigan, to develop a standard test. But the huge backdrop was a vaccine. A vaccine was in development, and it would affect the way this test was constructed.
A Western blot is a test where they actually take a blotter, and on this blotter they take a drop of your blood or your serum and they put it on the blot and it starts to move, it migrates. The bacteria has proteins on the outside of its surface, and your immune system recognizes some of these specific proteins. It's like a lock and a key. If you have 5 of these specific proteins that show you've been exposed to Lyme, you have a CDC positive Western blot.
But what these powers of Lyme disease decided to do was to eliminate 2 of those key markers because they were going to be used in the development of a vaccine. Those 2 markers would be used to spur the antibody response when you got the vaccine. So they decided they needed to remove them from the test so that if you had been vaccinated, you would not test positive for Lyme disease.
Now, why is that important? When you take away the 31 and 34 bands, which are highly specific for Lyme, you're then taking away the possibility for those people who've not had the vaccine to help diagnose this disease. So if you come to a doctor's office, Doc, I got a swollen knee, I can't walk, I'm tired, my memory's not working, I've seen 20 doctors, and they bring in their Western blot. And they've got 4 out of 5 bands, but your 5th band happens to be the 31 or 34. They would call that a CDC negative Western blot. Yet, you have Lyme disease.
There is a vaccine, but now there are reports of serious side effects.
By the late 1990s, there were 2 companies making 2 competing vaccines that were almost identical. One of them got mired in lawsuits because people claimed there were side effects, and it was pulled from the market, leaving only Lymerix. There were a lot of unanswered questions about Lymerix. The FDA panel that passed it, they said that there were a lot of unknowns here, but they were passing it through anyway.
This safety issue here seems to me to be very complicated compared to any vaccine I know that has been licensed. Those who did the trial have unearthed some very interesting, sinister possibilities that may or may not be real. And as I said earlier, rare events will become common when 1 million people are vaccinated.
I might comment that this is fairly rare for a vaccine to be voted on with so much ambivalence. So that is all for the formal vote.
In the years since it's been on the market, 600,000 people have taken it. Nearly 300 adverse reactions have been reported to the FDA.
A panel of experts that advises the FDA found the story so compelling that it asked the agency to carry out a large-scale investigation of possible harmful effects of the vaccine.
There was a meeting at FDA. I was actually invited to go to that meeting. The star witness at this FDA meeting was the chief scientist for the Connaught vaccine. So you got it? Like there was Glaxo and Connaught. Connaught pulled out. He said, since Lymerix has been given out to so many people, we can see that there are some very severe side effects. These are not common side effects, but some of them are very bad. And I would never recommend vaccinating people with this vaccine.
There is no such thing as a perfect vaccine. What we can say is that this vaccine is very effective and it's very well tolerated.
It's been a nightmare. Prior to this, I was hunting, fishing, hiking.
How much has it changed your life?
I don't have a life anymore.
In April, the manufacturer of a Lyme disease vaccine took it off the market, citing poor sales, following unproven allegations of side effects.
The vaccine was taken off the market in 2002. We have not had a Lyme disease vaccine for 20 years, and yet those 2 markers were not restored to the test. If you were bitten by a tick tomorrow, this is the test that would be used to diagnose you. Many people have invested their careers in this model of Lyme disease. It's easy to diagnose, it's straightforward to cure. And that is the story that prevails today. But it's far different from where we started. In the beginning, there was openness. There was willingness to consider lots of possibilities. But over time, doors closed. When I went back and looked at some of the early scientific literature, I found a sort of familiar illness. So I'm just going to read from a 1994 letter by Alan Steer. It has become increasingly apparent that the Lyme disease spirochete, Borrelia burgdorferi, may persist in some patients for years. Of particular concern, recent studies have shown that the spirochete may persist in the nervous system and may cause chronic neurologic involvement. The word chronic is there a couple of times.
Some of the authors who have signed on to those guidelines, if you look at their published work from the late 80s and early 90s, their words say exactly what we say. Chronic.
Once you get Lyme disease, your body's immune system doesn't deal with it terribly well. It doesn't clear that spirochete from your body, and you can be infected for virtually forever.
And it's a very scary disease.
It doesn't really have to be. I think it's overemphasized how bad it can be. With prompt treatment and recognition, it's not a big deal.
Another concept that has been more or less brushed aside is whether a mother can pass Lyme disease onto her unborn baby.
It was a dramatic and frightening new development. The germ that causes Lyme can also travel through the placenta.
On occasion, a pregnant woman has been able to transmit the illness to the developing child in the uterus. This may have serious complications for the developing child. We don't know how frequently this happens at this point, but it is something that we are concerned about.
They did autopsies on these babies and found spirochetes in their tissues, in their hearts, in their lungs. This was solid science, but it became something that was dismissed in the mainstream literature and practice. They used to acknowledge that chronic Lyme disease was real. They used to acknowledge congenital Lyme disease.
But at a certain point in time, that became dogma that there is no such thing as chronic Lyme disease, period. End of story. In order to qualify a vaccine, it's much more helpful to have a fairly simplistic model where you can easily tell who has the disease and who doesn't have the disease. And furthermore, you banish the notion that the infection can persist despite application of treatment. If you acknowledge those biologic realities, it makes it considerably more difficult to qualify a vaccine.
After years of research, it begs the question, why is there still no vaccine people can get to prevent Lyme disease?
I think the time has come to reconsider the decision. Lyme disease is the only infection that I know of for which there is an effective vaccine, but it's not available to the public.
And in fact, the French biotech firm Valneva is testing a new vaccine that is similar to Limerix.
Is this vaccine based on a different medicine than the old one?
No, actually, it's quite similar to the old vaccine. They did change it a little bit. They removed a protein, which they thought may have been causing some health problems. But we now know that the old vaccine actually doesn't cause any health problems.
There are so many conspiracy theories swirling around the public, like the anti-vaxxers, right? And I think what happens with Lyme disease is that it gets swept up into all of that. When, in fact, in this situation, we're not talking about a conspiracy. We're talking about flawed science. Science that has been reinvented to facilitate products.
It would be great if we had a vaccine that was effective and safe. But that's not going to solve our problem of ticks. And moreover, we can protect ourselves from Lyme disease, but there's other things, as we know, in ticks. We need a vaccine that would attack all of these illnesses. An anti-tick vaccine really would be the ideal approach. But beyond that, we have this other elephant in the room. We have the many, many people, year after year, who remain sick.
This is a hard problem. The way to resolve it, it's not to make everything so simple and so cut and dry. It is to really look at the nuance. I really did come to believe, after all of this research and investigation, that the definition of Lyme disease had been twisted to accommodate the passage of that vaccine. It was a business interest. It was a rationalization in the interests of a product, but not the patient.
I want you to look at that.
Yeah.
This is your brainstem.
Yes.
This is responsible for balance, for swallowing, for breathing, for heart rate. This very tip of the brain right here is your motor strip. It starts with your hips and your legs. Okay. So, look. Gray,
Yeah.
orange, purple, white, that's healthy.
Okay.
These colors are damaged. Number 5 is black. See the black? You have a lot of damage, Julia. You can't even see your brainstem. Your brainstem is completely black. Your motor strip, sensory, all black. It's why you can't move your legs. It's why you can't feel your legs. You have your answers.
So I'm not going crazy.
You're not going crazy. Dr. Shroff said that without treatment for Lyme, this gets worse. And pretty soon, you would have lost everything. 3 years of treatment, and I keep questioning myself if I'm doing the right thing. We've been doing the right thing. We've been keeping it at bay. What did you tell me today during your MRI? You said, why do we have to do this again? They're not gonna find anything. You see, you found something. This is why you have the issues you have. Look, they're right there. That's damage. You're not going crazy. Julie and I initially were supposed to be in India for 3 months. But the clinic shut down, and we were forced to leave. Unfortunately, the stem cells really didn't change that much. A lot of letdowns. But if we want to get Julia better, we have to give trust. We have to try. We long for her to walk. I would like to see her dance with her friends. I'd like to dance with her. It's the simplest things that we take for granted every day that I pray for with Julia.
My legs hurt.
But we'll get there. We'll get there slowly, and I think when we do get there, it's going to be very rewarding.
The 16th candle, I've been told, is for your greatest love, or even your hero. When I thought about who that one person was, one person came to mind, and that was you, Dad. Dad, the greatest doctors in the world weren't able to figure out what was wrong with me, but you were. Without you, I'm afraid I wouldn't be here today giving you guys this speech. Thank you for holding my hand through every blood test, every scary procedure, and every single hard time. You are my hero, my greatest love, and my biggest inspiration. My idea of a miracle has definitely changed. That day, I asked for a miracle, and my miracle in my mind was getting up from the chair and walking and going back to that life of normalcy and dancing, and it is still. That's, that would be a miracle. But I think miracles happen every day. I think that me sitting here talking to you is a miracle. What happened to me and the reaching out and the love, that's a miracle. And I think we don't even realize it. The little things every day that we have are miracles.
It's funny, people ask me all the time, are you angry that you weren't diagnosed early on? And you could have avoided all of this. And I tell them, I'm actually not angry. I would certainly never wish what I went through on anyone. But in some sense, I feel like it was part of the bigger plan for me. It wasn't always pleasant, but you know what? There's been so many good things about what I've gone through. Whether I live 5 hours, 5 days, 50 months, or 50 years, it's got to be like a fulfilling life. I mean, I can't look back and regret not having done things.
Happy belated New Year. People have asked me if everything's okay. They hadn't heard from me in a while, and I just wanted to send this message. I may look tired. I am pretty tired. I think I need to conserve my energy for the push ahead. I made a promise to all of you that I would continue to work tirelessly. I will continue to honor that promise. And my thoughts and prayers are with all of you, so take care.
taking care of people at the prime of their lives, great jobs, beautiful families, devastating cancers. Like, why did this happen to me? I mean, that's the universal question. Why did this happen to me? My grandmother used to say to me, why not you? Why shouldn't it happen to you? The question is not why, but how do you move beyond it?
I think about the people who have died and that are dying and the people who are alone, and I feel very guilty because I'm getting all this help and these people need help too. I feel like I'm obligated to do this and that this needs to happen in order for there to be a change.
I was a different person before Lyme, a normal girl. Now is the time for action. We must stand together as one. For the people suffering right now, let us be their voice. For the people we have lost, let us grieve them and fight in their memory. I am determined to bring about change, and I trust that together we can bring hope to those who have forgotten the meaning of the word.
My mind is there, but my body isn't yet. But I'm determined, even if I am in a wheelchair and I am sick. I want to help more people.
You can't give up. Because if it was you, your family, you can't just turn people away and say there's no hope. People are contacting me all the time from all over the world. I need to share this information because this is a worldwide epidemic.
The whole world is in a disastrous situation because of the position of a small group of experts at the IDSA in the United States of America, because they made recommendations and it was imposed to the whole world.
So here we are in the midst of a huge epidemic. We've all come to an understanding of what this can mean in our everyday lives. In the case of COVID, we are accepting that there is something called long haul. The difference is they are being taken seriously. But Lyme disease has been this quiet epidemic for decades. We all have to realize that we're at risk. This is a growing and common threat. And yet, for too long, the problem has been minimized. Settling this debate is going to require new researchers, new science. We need new ideas about Lyme disease and people who are willing to challenge the old guard.
Right by my tweezer, that's a larva, and it's fully engorged. It's probably going to drop off today. The fully engorged larvae look like poppy seeds. One larva right ear, one larva left ear.
We have an early warning in your health this morning.
Scientists predict this could be the worst Lyme disease season in years.